Life magazine was first published in New York in 1883 by John Ames Mitchell and Andrew Miller, and from the first issue onwards it featured a large amount of humorous illustration. The cartoonist Edward Kemble dominated the covers and pages of the first few issues, but very quickly other humorous illustrators such as F.G. Atwood and Dan Beard also began to feature. There were even some early contributions from Mitchell himself, but before long he confined himself to the task of editing the magazine. At this time all the illustrations were black and white and reproduced by the engraving process, which had the unfortunate effect of making it far from easy to tell one illustrator from another. But within a few years the new photolithographic process enabled original pen and ink drawings to be transferred directly onto the lithographic plates. Charles Dana Gibson was among the first to realise the potential of this print revolution, and he began using an energetic gestural pen technique which allowed for greater personal expression and fine linear detail. Throughout the 1890s he increasingly featured pretty young females in his illustrations. They were immediately christened the Gibson Girls, and they made their creator a household name. At the same time, another equally significant but radically different illustrator made his debut in the pages of Life. T.S. Sullivan also had an expressive and lively pen and ink technique, but unlike Gibson he was unapologetically comic and had a radical approach to the exaggeration and caricature of his subjects. Despite their enormous heads, both his humans and anthropomorphic animals managed to be comic and oddly believable at the same time, and his illustrations were every bit as popular as Gibson's dainty females. Within a couple of years the older illustrators had also found greater graphic freedom through the new technology, and it showed clearly in the newfound vigour of their styles. As Life grew in popularity, many other illustrators started queuing up to be featured. F.T. Richards and German-born Hy Meyer both had agreeable and versatile illustrative styles, which made them particularly useful to the magazine during the coming decade. By the turn of the century, full-colour printing was also possible, but Life was reluctant to stand the increased cost and rather grudgingly began featuring covers using basic spot colour instead. Albert Blashfield created the earliest of these, and he was soon joined by others, including Albert Levering. Levering would quickly become every bit as important to the magazine's fortunes as Sullivan and Gibson, and although he was just as capable of astonishingly well-controlled hatching techniques, he frequently used a more graphic and relatively minimalist approach. Walter Harrison Cady had been hired as a staff artist in 1900, and very quickly his charming and frequently complex scenarios featured in virtually every issue. His inking style was remarkably precise, and he combined it very successfully with agreeably cartoonish characters. Gus Dirks had already created the popular Bugville series, but following his suicide at the age of 23, Cady took over and developed the concept. In 1907, James Montgomery Flagg had his first illustration for Life published, and although his later reputation would be based on more representational figure work, the early energetic pen and ink images he created for Life demonstrated real talent for large-headed caricatures. He was also one of the first of Life's artists to feature in full colour. Mitchell had eventually given in to the competition and accepted the inevitability of colour, not only on the covers but occasionally in the interior pages too. This quickly led to Life becoming a more attractive proposition for the more painterly representational illustrators of the day. William Balfour Kerr and Power O'Malley both relied on full-colour reproduction, and they began to contribute representational painted images. The female figures of Coles Phillips were frequently used as cover art too, although more often than not he was more inclined to explore the possibilities of flat colour. But despite the incursion of less humorous work, naturally enough most of Life's contributors were aiming to get a laugh, and few if any did it better than Harry Grant Dart. He began his own long run in 1909, and his series of mock historical crowd scenes were a particular success with the readers. Both Will Crawford and H.M. Wilder favoured a similar technique, and both used precise inking to create remarkably solid, plausible cartoon characters. The work of Ray Irving also first appeared in 1909, and although there was nothing particularly out of the ordinary about his early images, within a few years he would become the driving force behind a radically modernist stance, using greater levels of abstraction than seen previously. But with the exception of Irving, life continued to be dominated by the giants of expressive inking and the less humorous but visually impressive painterly illustrators. When the Great War began in Europe in 1914, the magazine published many cartoons, which were an attempt by John Ames Mitchell to persuade the initially reluctant American government to help the Allies against the German enemy. And in 1917 America did enter the war, but unfortunately Mitchell died soon after and never got to see Germany defeated. In that same year, a 23-year-old Norman Rockwell created his first cover painting for Life, and he went on to produce another 24 or so into the later 1920s. Not much later, Frank Leyendecker also began contributing highly rendered, usually romantic and agreeably frivolous painted covers, but not for long, as he committed suicide in 1923. In the wake of John Ames Mitchell's death, Charles Darner Gibson, who had by now amassed a huge personal fortune from the success of his Gibson Girls, rashly decided to pay $1 million to become the new owner of the magazine. But readership fell sharply during his tenure. By the time he sold Life at a loss to the publisher Claire Maxwell in 1921, the magazine was virtually bankrupt. Ray Irving had by now been appointed art director, and under his command Life began to increasingly feature more radically modernist humorous work, including a large amount by Irving himself, and this work appeared alongside the illustrations of the earlier more traditional organic artists. And although Maxfield Parrish had been only a very infrequent contributor to date, in the 20s he began appearing with greater frequency, and he created a remarkably attractive light-hearted series of fantasy covers. Under Irving's control of all things visual, the magazine's fortunes stabilised, for a while at least. Fred G. Cooper was among Irving's new recruits, and his deliberately underdrawn line doodles became ubiquitous in the magazine's pages. But he was also a diverse stylist, and he used his appearances on the covers as an opportunity to demonstrate his versatility. Gluyas Williams was another master of minimalism, whose usually wordless sequential images poked gentle fun at suburban America. And although usually considered to be a writer, Don Herold felt confident enough in this new stylistic climate to begin submitting his eccentrically visualised sequential cartoons. The last of these newer contributors was John Held Jr., and with the possible exception of Irving himself, Held's distinctive blend of Art Deco and cartoon principles most memorably captured the ethos of the Roaring Twenties and the not-so-bright young things who populated it. But even among the newer contributors there were more traditionally expressive comic artists such as Percy Crosby and C.H. Sykes swelling the ranks, and they too featured regularly among the by now remarkably diverse images which had become a defining feature of the magazine. Unfortunately for Life, Ray Irving quit in 1925 to become the art editor of the newly founded New Yorker magazine. And although some stalwarts such as John Held and Fred Cooper continued to contribute, readership of the magazine fell considerably. In the later 1920s they were joined by younger equally distinctive talents, including Russell Patterson, whose stylish light comic technique featured regularly. From 1931 onwards, Life could only manage monthly publication, but even so it continued to attract new illustrators. Barbara Sherman, Ned Hilton and Edwina Dunn were among those whose work for the magazine kick-started their subsequent careers. The final edition of Life was published in 1936, and almost immediately the title reappeared as a weekly photojournalistic magazine. The original had managed a run of 53 years, and in that half-century should have seen the transition from engraving to photolithography and monochrome to full colour. It had launched, established and maintained the careers of many of America's most talented and influential illustrators and comic artists. And I hope that the images in this video have given some idea of the incredibly diverse range of visual wonders that Life published. Sadly, it seems certain we'll never see anything quite like it again.